Hi, my name's Maria from IELTSonlinepreparation.com, and in this video we'll look at how to edit your IELTS essay. We'll take a look at the most common mistakes and how to avoid them. We'll look at the use of articles, a, an and the. We'll look at subject-verb agreement, the pluralization of nouns, mistakes with common grammatical structures, mistakes by not using finite verbs, mistakes using because and because of, mistakes using the wrong word form or part of speech, the 11 most common spelling mistakes, and also common punctuation mistakes. But before we do that, let's just discuss some general tips that will help you. First of all, always leave time to check your writing. Sometimes the best way to do this is at the end of sentences and paragraphs. In other words, don't wait until you finish the whole essay. It's easier to check a sentence or a paragraph than an essay. And also, you may have run out of time by the time you finish your essay. Another thing is you're probably making these mistakes because you're writing too quickly, and you probably don't see these mistakes because you are reading too quickly. So here's a suggestion. Read with a pen in your hand as you check, and that way you really look at the words as you read them, and you're far more likely to see the mistakes. And then finally, make a checklist of your own mistakes. If there's a word you misspell, for example, write it down. Here's a suggestion for how you could record your errors. Get a notebook, divide it into 3 columns. On the left-hand column, you could record the error. In the middle column, you could record the correction. And then most importantly, or I think most importantly, on the right-hand column, you can record the type of error you made. So for example, if it was a grammar error, what was it? Was it a tense error? Was it an error with articles? Was it an error with not using finite verbs? If it was a spelling error, what was the word? Write it out correctly. If it was vocabulary, was it a wrong spelling? Was it the wrong word form? Or just the wrong word for that context? This way, every time you go to write another Task 2 IELTS essay, you can open up your notebook, have a quick look at the types of errors you're making, and it increases your awareness of these errors. And that's the first step towards actually making your writing more accurate. So, try it out, see how it goes. So the first error by far is articles. Have a read of the 2 sentences on the left. Television and video games have become essential entertainment for many children. Some people believe we should return to traditional value system. Now you should know that you need an article, a, the, an, or perhaps 0 article before a noun. If you look at the diagram on the right hand side, this is, I think, a really easy way of remembering or becoming more aware of when you can use articles. The first thing to decide is whether the noun you're looking at is countable or uncountable, singular or plural. So let's look at our first example. Now, the problem noun here is entertainment. Now, hopefully you know that this is actually countable, and in this case, it's singular. There are many types of entertainment. Now, the next step is to decide whether the noun is known to the reader or listener as well as to the writer or speaker, i.e., is the noun definite? If it is definite, we're going to use the, as the diagram suggests. But if it's not definite, in this case, we're going to use a or an. So, we have our noun, entertainment, we have our adjective here. So in terms of word order, we need to insert an article, an, before the adjective. Let's take a look at the one below. Some believe we should return to traditional value system. Now hopefully you can see there's a problem with this noun here, system. If we follow the diagram, this is a countable noun. In this case it's singular, and in this case it's one of many systems, which is what and an mean. So here again we need to insert a Now, traditional and value are both modifying system, acting as adjectives, so we need to insert it before those adjectives. A traditional system. In general, when you use the, we're speaking about something definite that both the listener and the reader or writer know about. When we use a or an, we're speaking about one of many or speaking generally. Those are the basic rules. Another very common mistake are mistakes with subject and verb agreement. Now, subject and verb is a clause, and it's the basic building block of any English sentence. Have a read of these three sentences. Number 1. Television and video games has become an essential entertainment for children. Number 2. The relationship among families have become strained due to ... Number 3. There have been a change in the composition of the family. So looking at sentence number 1, hopefully you can see that we actually have two things here, television and video games. So if I change those two things into a pronoun, I would use they. Can I say they has? No, I can't. I have to say they have become. And therefore, my subject and my verb agree. Looking at the second sentence, let's identify the verb. Okay, have again, have become. Now, this one looks as if the subject is families, and families have makes sense. However, if we look at this word here, among is a preposition, and anything that comes after a preposition is an object. It's never a subject. Therefore, the subject in this sentence is actually the relationship. And if we think about which pronoun would use with the relationship, it would be it. So it have, can we say that? No, we can't. We need to say it has, or the relationship has. And now that subject and that verb agree with each other. In sentence number 3, this is a bit trickier. So this is a very, very common construction, which we'll look at later. It looks as if there is the subject, but in actual fact, this is what we call a dummy subject. And the real topic of this sentence is a change in the composition of the family. Now, there's 3 parts to this sentence, and the thing that we're talking about is a change. The composition and the family are actually objects of these prepositions in and of. Now again, we've identified a change as the subject. If we think about changing that into a pronoun, it would be it. Can we say it have? Here's the verb here. No, we can't. We have to say it has. And now our subject and our verb agree with each other. There has been a change in the composition of the family. Another common mistake is the pluralization of nouns. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's read these 2 sentences. Number 1, there are 2 main reasons causing alienation among family member. Number 2, government and company could also increase work holiday. So in sentence number 1, hopefully you can see that we've already counted 2 of these reasons. So we need to make sure that any nouns agree with the number that we have in front of them, in this case 2. There's another mistake in this sentence as well. Are we talking about just one family member? No, we're talking about family members in general. Therefore, we need to pluralize this noun by adding the S. So when you are making general points, you must pluralize the noun. Let's apply that to number 2. Government and company. Okay, so we're talking generally, so let's pluralize these nouns. Governments and companies. Could also increase work holiday. again, we're speaking generally, so we need to pluralize the noun. Now let's take a look at mistakes with very common grammatical structures. Number 1. There have much air pollution in China due to heavy industry. So the structure we're focusing on is this here. But the problem is it's used incorrectly. After there, when you're introducing some topic, we can never use there without some form of the be verb. In this case, again, we need to make our subject and our verb agree with each other. So, hopefully you can see that air pollution, in this case, is the topic we're talking about. If we go back to our articles rule, we have to decide, is it countable or uncountable? In this case, pollution is uncountable, and therefore we need a singular verb. So instead of there have, we need to write there is much air pollution. Now there's another small problem with this sentence as well. This word here, much. If we look at the grammar of this sentence, we can see that it's positive. However, we shouldn't use much in a positive sentence. We can only use it in negative sentences. For example, there isn't much air pollution. What we have to do is replace it with a lot of air pollution. So now the sentence should read, there is a lot of air pollution in China due to heavy industry. Remember, you must always use some form of the verb be with there. There is, there are, there have been, there were, there was. The second sentence has this very common construction here. Most of buildings are mainly built for functional reasons. Now, the problem is, when we're using most, if we use of with it, we need to have some kind of determiner. Most of the buildings are mainly built for functional reasons. Now, if we have some kind of determiner, in this case the, we are talking about a specific set of buildings. However, this looks like it's actually a sentence trying to describe a general point. Therefore, I need to take out both of these and just have most buildings are mainly built for functional reasons. So you have two options. You can either do most plus a plural noun, or you can have most plus of plus, a determiner. In this case, a determiner is usually the, or it could be my, plus noun. Those are the forms that go with most. Let's take a look at the last sentence and see how it's constructed. Okay, we have here air pollution. This is the subject. And hopefully you can see that this complement here completes that subject. So the main idea is air pollution is common in China. Now what we have in the middle of this clause is a relative clause. But what has happened is we have reduced the relative clause. However, we've done it incorrectly. And the problem is this verb. Now, if I were to write out this whole relative clause, I would write out this, which is caused. Now, hopefully you can see which is caused by heavy industry is passive. We're talking about air pollution. It doesn't cause itself, it's caused by heavy industry. Now, if I want to reduce a relative clause, all I have to do in the case of a passive relative clause like this one is cross out the which, the relative pronoun, cross out the be verb, and I'm left with caused. So air pollution, comma, caused by heavy industry, comma, is common in China. Let's put those commas in. And this is a reduced relative clause. Another problem is with the use of finite verbs. Now, a finite verb, we look down here, is one that is in either present simple or past simple form. And every sentence needs to have a finite verb. in English. So let's look at these first two. Distance learning offering study opportunities, working overtime becoming very common in Asian countries. So number one, here's the subject, distance learning. Now we have a verb-like thing in the middle, but it's not in a present simple form or a past simple form, so we know it's incorrect. We have to change this into present simple or past simple. So we have to think about the meaning of our sentence. Here I'm trying to make a general point, and therefore I'm far more likely to use present simple. So to change offering into present simple, all I have to do is type offers. And remember, I need to make my verb agree with my subject. Here's the subject. If I were to change that into a pronoun, it would be it. So it offers study opportunities. Looking at number two, here is our subject, working overtime. If I were to change that into a pronoun, it would again be it. Now, I have two choices in terms of the finite verb I use and also the tense I use. If I look at the sentence, there's two main meanings. One could be I'm talking about a trend, in which case I would use the present continuous is becoming very common in Asian countries. Is my finite verb in this case. Or if I wanted to connect the recent past with now, I could actually choose to use present perfect simple. Has become very common. So it depends on your meaning as to which finite verb and which tense you use. But in both of these cases, is a finite verb and has is a finite verb. And so I'm using a finite verb in both of these sentences. Another common mistake is in the use of because and because of. Let's read these three sentences. Air pollution is increasing, full stop, because of there are many factories and cars. Now hopefully you can see or you know that of is a preposition, and what follows a preposition is a noun. However, here what follows is the subject and the verb. So we have to get rid of those because they are not a noun. Now it's correct because of many factories and cars. But there's another problem. Can you see that here I've interrupted my idea by putting a full stop in? So I have to get rid of that full stop and make this into a little b. And now the sentence is grammatically correct. And I'm using a preposition here and two nouns there, many factories and cars. Now let's have a look at the second sentence. Again, hopefully you should see that I've interrupted my idea with a full stop. First thing we need to do is get rid of that and change the punctuation. Okay, let's read it and see if it's okay. Air pollution is increasing because there are now far more factories and cars. So what we did effectively was change this because into a conjunction, joining the two clauses in our sentence. After because, we have our subject and our verb. So this is good. And here in the main clause, we have our subject and our verb phrase is increasing. Now, the last sentence is very similar to the second sentence, but here's another very common mistake. Instead of interrupting the flow, we are still slightly interrupting with a comma. But we don't need to use a comma in English. We just continue the idea. Now you may have seen sometimes, if we look into the middle sentence, you may have seen that we want to sometimes emphasize the subordinate clause first. In this case, we need to change the order because there are now far more factories and cars, but because we've started with a subordinate clause, now we must use a comma and of course make the a lowercase a. So you can start with a subordinate clause first, but if you do, then you must have a comma after that subordinate clause. So just to recap, the patterns are because of plus noun. Because of is a preposition here. Because plus subject and verb. And don't use a comma before because, or a full stop for that matter as well. Other common mistakes involve using the wrong word form. Read number 1. For instance, life in the past was peace and harmony. Now hopefully you know that after a be verb you need to have an adjective form. Peace here though is a noun, so how do you change it into an adjective? By adding full. How do we change harmony into an adjective? With the suffix aus. Number 2, the internet is a new education method. Now we have here a noun. What comes before a noun? An adjective. However, education here is a noun form. We need to change this noun form into an adjective. How do we do that? By adding al. And in the last example, students might feel a sense of isolated and loneliness. Okay, like we saw before, we know that of is a preposition, and we know that after prepositions we need to have a noun. We have a noun here, so that's okay, but you should realize that isolated is an adjective. How do you change isolated into a noun? By adding the shin ending, a sense of isolation and loneliness. It's very important that you know how our noun phrases are constructed, and you know how to change verbs into nouns, into adjectives, into adverbs. In this way, you'll be able to use your new vocabulary much more flexibly and accurately. Spelling above band score 6 is still a problem for lots of people. Now, according to the Cambridge Learners Corpus, the 11 most common spelling mistakes at band score 6 and above are the words government with an N, environment with an N, there with an EI, different with an E, believe with an IE, percentage with an A, society with an IE, until, which with an H, nowadays with an A and an S, and finally definitely with an I. Test yourself. See if you can spell all of these words 100% correctly. If you can't, keep practicing. Finally, we have punctuation. Read this short passage. There are many people learning English overseas now. This is because speaking English can help secure a good job. However, it's also important to consider the cost of education. Studying abroad has its own advantages. So, hopefully you can see that here is a proper noun. So as soon as we use a proper noun, we need to use a capital letter. So that should be a capital. Another thing is, this is one complete idea here, but we've tried to join it with a comma. Well, we can't do that. We need to finish the idea with a full stop and then turn this into a capital letter. So full stop, capital letter. This is because speaking English, here again we have our proper noun that we need to capitalize, can help secure a good job. However, it's also important. We have two mistakes here. This kind of word is called a discourse marker. They're like signposts that tell our reader which direction we're going in. However, the grammar of discourse markers is very particular. I've tried to use it with a comma, but I can't. I have two choices. I can either finish that idea with a full stop and have a capital letter like that, or instead of a comma, I can use a semicolon. A semicolon is in effect a conjunction joining the clauses. I don't need a capital letter after a semicolon. I still need the comma after the however. Now you'll see it's also important. So this is a contraction of two words, it is. So I need to show that by adding an apostrophe. It's also important to consider the cost of education. This is good. I finished this idea with a full stop and started the new sentence with a capital letter. Studying abroad has its own advantages. Aha. Whereas here I forgot the apostrophe. In this case, I don't need an apostrophe because this isn't a contraction of two words. It's actually the possessive adjective, its own advantages. So, when you are thinking about punctuation, all proper nouns need a capital letter. Finish your ideas with a full stop and start the new sentence with a capital letter. Be careful when you're using discourse markers. Be careful when you are using contractions of words. And always proofread for your punctuation and separate your ideas into paragraphs. So hopefully this has given you a few ideas of what to look for when you're editing your essay. The more that you practice, the better you will become. And I really recommend that you keep an error correction notebook and that you actually correct your writing as you write either the sentence or the paragraph. It's so much easier to correct a sentence or paragraph rather than a whole essay. And keep an eye out for these things that we've gone over because these are very common mistakes. Thanks for listening. Sign up to our newsletter, our free newsletter at IELTSonlinepreparation.com.